After scoring his third consecutive victory over Steinitz in Game 4 of the 8086 World Championship match, Zukertort took a very commanding 3-1 lead in the match, and in Game 5 he had white pieces again. Would he be able to build upon his success? Would Steinitz manage to stabilize? Well, let's find out in today's video. In Game 5, Zukertort once again opened with his customary move d4, but after d5, c4, c6, instead of going e3, which didn't quite bring him very good positions in games 1 and 3 of the match, he decided to go for knight c3, which is a more common move. However, after knight f6, he still decided to go for e3 and go for a very quiet variation against the swan. This is very solid play because it reinforces the center, but on the other hand, this bishop is now locked behind this pawn, so it is a little bit not so ambitious as, say, setups where you develop the bishop outside, or alternatively don't move the pawn yet and play, let's say, knight f3. Anyway, after e3, bishop f5 was played, and Steinitz was sticking to this move, which is somewhat provocative because the bishop departs early. The idea is to be able to play e6 without locking the bishop behind the pawn chain, but the problem is that this weakens the b7 pawn, which is not so easy to defend. So after cd5, queen b3, we have seen also in the previous games that Zukertort was very much trying to punish Steinitz for this early excursion of the bishop by attacking the b7 pawn. And nowadays, this variation is actually kind of, pretty modern, because knight c6 is apparently playable. And okay, there is some theory after queen b7, bishop d7, black is threatening to go rook b8 and e5 and very quickly blast open the position and claim there is some compensation for the pawn. But of course, this was, played in 8086, not 2020. And also, Steinitz was known for his, let's say, provocative and, somewhat weird-looking defensive moves. So this is why he decided to play bishop c8, losing to tempi, but claiming that this whole excursion of the queen and also capture on d5 were in black's favor. By the way, if you're wondering, some queen d7 potential is not so good because knight f3, knight e6, bishop b5, then you have to reckon with this knight e5, which is extremely unpleasant, and this is just not the way to play. So bishop c8, knight f3, knight e6, both sides continue developing, but maybe it is better not yet to move the knight to c6 and start with, for example, e6, bishop e7 or d6 and castle, precisely to avoid what happened in the game, and that is this move knight to e5. Usually we are taught not to violate the opening principles and move the same piece twice, but here the thing is that this has a concrete idea in mind, namely pressure against d5 is now on the agenda, because if knight takes e5, d takes e5, then you lose the d5 pawn and it is quite bad. I mean, after knight e7 you can take on d5 or even play e4, which is of course maybe even more powerful, but that is not so relevant. On the other hand, maybe you can play e6 now and prevent bishop b5, because this knight will obviously be a target, but then still you have to reckon with this knight. Maybe white will still play f4 as in the game, and in general, if white can stabilize knight on e5, then they are doing quite well, and that's what black should in general avoid in these positions. And now after e6, bishop b5 was played. Once again, you could consider f4, and then to develop the bishop to d3. But okay, bishop b5 is not bad. The question is what happens after bishop d7, breaking this pin and kind of threatening some knight e5 stuff, potentially. Steinitz was probably planning to just take the bishop pair and then take it from there, but on the other hand, the position is kind of closed and you have also moved this knight several times to exchange the bishop. So I'm not sure if this whole excursion would have been worth it in this particular case, which is why maybe here bishop b5 is a little bit too simplistic, although white retains some advantage in any case. However, Steinitz played a very inaccurate move, queen to c7. The queen simply doesn't feel very comfortable on the c-file, and also the pin is not broken. So after bishop to d2, now rook c1 is coming very fast. Now bishop d6 was happened. a6 was probably better to challenge the bishop immediately. Then after bishop c6, b takes c6, white would probably have to play like knight to e4, trying to open up the c-file, and now play against this weak c6 pawn. But yeah, it is still very much a game and probably better than what happened in the game, because bishop d6 is kind of seems sensible to try to pressure this knight and castle, But the problem is that after f4, this knight is such a nuisance, you can pretty much never now kind of consider taking it on e5. Yeah, white's pieces are very, very wonderful. We will play castles next, and white just has a great position. This bishop is kind of never coming back into play, and this knight is kind of suffocating the entire position. In the game, castles followed. Rook c1. Okay, you could also start by castling. And here, probably being unhappy with how the opening went and how his position looked like, Steinitz made a move that, you know, nowadays is made by chess amateurs, honestly. I know you shouldn't be critical of the world champions, but honestly, the decision to play bishop to e5, this is really a bad decision, because after f takes e5, you have given up the bishop pair, you have opened up the f file potentially, you have weakened your king side, and this is just strategically completely won for white. Game continued, knight d8 castles, and here f6 was played, trying to challenge the e5 square and kinda tie the Gordian knot in one go. However, this is also involves a strategic risk because you're also opening up the position. Now bishop to d3 was played, improving the bishop. The bishop has done its job on d5, and also this creates the trick of f takes e5, bishop takes h7, king takes h7, rook to f8, winning the exchange. So rook f7 was played, trying to renew the threat of playing or taking on e5. Now queen to c2, threatening bishop to h7. And now if, for example, so black tries to kind of prevent this by g6, there is actually the reason why white's position is so strong is because all these pieces are not participating, kind of, especially these two pieces on the queen side. So already bishop g6 is a possibility, h g6, queen g6, and now you can play rook g7 because your knight is hanging, and if you move the king, for example, I don't know, king f8, you can just play slowly, because once again you have a lot of the pieces into the attack, and already maybe just taking on f6 is good enough. This king is way too weak, and this leads to decisive advantage for white. In usual, when you have a lead in development and the opponent can't bring the defender so quickly, sacrifices work, and here you have actually 3 pawns for the piece, so it is not even such a big sacrifice to begin with. That is why, in order to deal with this threat, Steinitz played f5, but this is also a very sad move, because now you are kind of breaking down, you are not creating enough pressure on the e5 pawn, the center is stabilized, and this should give white free hand to create some attacking chances on the king side with the help of a timely g4 move. Now knight e2 was played, trying to get the knight to f4 and improve it a little bit. Bishop to d7. And here, Zukertort actually hesitated a little bit and played rook to f2. So once again, your position is so good that you can actually try to blast the position open with g4. We will see this move later in the game, but under even worse circumstances. The point is that obviously you don't want to take and open up the king side because everything collapses. And if you play g6, I will take gf. Also ef is not so good because it weakens the d5 pawn. So gf, and now simply knight f4, and after rook g7, king h1, white will actually be the one using the g file to attack. Note how black's position is not coordinated. This knight is set, can go to either of these squares, and it's much easier for white to bring the pieces to the king side and create an attack. So rook f2 was played, which is a little bit slow. Rook c8, bishop c3, again very, very slow. Maybe g4 here was once again possible. Queen b6, now queen d2 to avoid any potential discoveries by the knight. Knight e7, and now Steinitz is playing fairly reasonable defensive game. The idea is to solve the problem of this bad bishop by playing bishop to b5. And actually now what white should do is play knight f4 to prevent this idea, because now bishop b5, you take and take on e6. So you lose a key pawn, the entire defense collapses. So after knight f4, black would maybe have to play something else, but it's not so easy to find such a good move. For example, if g5, maybe I can go to h5 and maybe seek to jump to here at some point. Maybe also g4 is coming, so there is it's not so easy to come up with a good move for black. And white is still, I mean, obviously white can't lose an advantage in one go so easily. And now rook cf1 is a little bit too routine. So when we are attacking, at first glance it does look you have all the time in the world, but for the last few moves, Zukertort has been maneuvering somewhat aimlessly, losing some time, and Steinitz has managed to mobilize to an extent. And now after bishop to b5, actually black is threatening to exchange one of the very important defensive pieces, this bishop on, or attacking pieces actually, the bishop on d3. And if you play bishop b5, queen b5, knight f4, this was maybe probably better, although now when you don't have this bishop on d3, now g4 is much less powerful because the white squares are much more secure and black is somehow holding up. It's not entirely clear what the evaluation is. So Zukertort tried to keep the bishop by playing bishop b1, but now once again this bishop is annoying you, the knight can't move, and you will... So this is why this rook f1 move was so bad. Now this knight can't move. Steinitz played queen to a6, which is maybe a little bit... You know, it's sensible, but maybe a little bit slow. Actually, g5 here was quite possible. It is a very, very useful move because at one point you are preparing knight g7, you are preventing knight f4, and also knight g6 now comes, and somehow your pieces are starting to get on the good squares. It does look a little bit risky to open up the king side when your opponent is attacking on that side, but when you compare this to a few moves ago when all your pieces were not mobilized, suddenly all your pieces are somewhat in play, so it's not at all that sense, like, because white was lost a lot of time and they didn't do anything with their initiative. You have kind of developed, so it is possible to play a little bit more riskily. Of course, you need to judge this carefully, things which is what makes the chess very hard. But after queen a6, g4, this finally comes, although a little bit in a worse circumstances than earlier. Still, you know, the game is pretty complex and imbalanced. g6 and now h3. So it is kind of hard for white to create progress here because once again, now this, if you take and then knight g6, maybe knight g7 or whatever, so black is not at all so worse, and this pressure is also quite annoying for white to deal with. So h3 was played, rook c7, rook e1. Finally moving the rook out of the way and preparing knight f4. But now we see that this whole idea with playing rook f1 kind of didn't pay off if you have to go back. Black continued with knight g7. You could also maybe consider just taking off this knight. It's not entirely clear if it's good because now this bishop would be kind of without a rival, but still it was a possibility. Knight g7, knight f4, and now this is the critical moment of the game. Even though white had a big advantage out of the opening, Zukertort didn't make the most of it, but and kind of let Steinitz back into the game, but it is kind of still difficult for black to play. And here black absolutely has to play g5, because now knight h5 is not so good because the knight controls this square. And after knight g2, knight g6, yes, black is still worse, but once again, like, your pieces are somehow coordinated. You are currently holding on to this f5 pawn, you may want to play f4 or something potentially, and it's not entirely clear what will white do next. But for some reason, Steinitz played the move knight to c8, and this is a big mistake because you are kind of undeveloping the knight, removing it away from the king side. And to be fair, I'm not even sure where the knight is going. Maybe Steinitz was hoping to get the knight to b6 and then to c4, but and he was known for these extravagant defensive resources, but this just doesn't work here because white still has a very dangerous attack here. After gf5, which finally happens, and now you can't take with this pawn because you drop d5, but probably what he should have done is he should have taken with the knight. Although that's also a little bit sad because after e4, d4, bishop e4, white will probably play d5, open up this bishop, and black is kind of collapsing. So that is why it was, you know, absolutely crucial not to move this knight, but to do something else, to play g5. And here, but see, here Steinitz played gf5, which is even worse than taking with the knight, because now only white will be able to utilize this open file. So simply rook g2, and now white has a very simple idea, like move the king, bring the other rook to the g file, bring the queen somewhere to the king side, like maybe with queen f2, queen h4, whatever. And once again, all these pieces are somehow unable to come to the king, especially like the knight, the queen, and the bishop. And at first glance, it looks like black is kind of okay after king h8, king h2, to queen c6. But after rook e to g1, it's becoming very, very tricky to come up with moves. And like the engine already gives like +8. Like there are a lot of threats, like knight h5 is a threat, but I don't even need to hurry. Like, what is black going to do? Like, if I was white and I was able to get some moves, like yeah, I would just, like, I can play bishop b4, bring the bishop, I can play queen e1, queen h4, queen f2, whatever, queen d1 maybe, knight h5. So yeah, the problem is that black doesn't have anything to play for, and kinda all white's pieces are pointed to the king side. So it was a very severe misjudgment on Steinitz's part. And actually the game concluded very quickly. So he tried knight e7, queen f2. Once again, bishop b4 and queen h4 are coming, and black doesn't have space, and the pieces are still kind of unable to defend the king. Queen e8. This was a kind of final blunder in a position that was already lost, because here rook g7 happened, and actually Steinitz resigned, because after rook g7, king g7, knight e6, he loses the rook, and it is all she wrote. So yeah, by the way, note also that this knight is also very annoying because it's pressuring e6. So yeah, just like that, the game ended, and it was like another catastrophic game by Steinitz, or even maybe the worst game for the Steinitz, because in the previous games that he lost, he was winning, and or he lost after a long struggle from an equal position, but this was just bad on all fronts. Horrible opening. Then when he got back into the game, he totally misplayed it, and then when he almost got into the back game again, then he played this knight c8, which just threw everything on one go. So yeah, after this game, Zukertort won the 4th time in a row and increased the lead in the match to almost to 3 points. So the result was 4-1, and yeah, it seemed almost as his match is going on, but as we will soon see, it was far from over. That was game 5 of the World Chess Championship match in 1886 between Steinitz and Zukertort. In the next video, we will continue the coverage of the match by examining game 6. In the meantime, you feel free to check some of the other content on this channel, and if you like it, feel free to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching this video, and see you in the next one. Bye bye.